We're looking at Jim Hall's solo on the classic Cole Porter tune, You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To. And I've taken 7 ideas from the solo that we can use as inspiration for our own solos. So this tune is taken from the Jim Hall album Concerto. This was recorded in 1975. It's on the CTI Records label. And this is just a great album all around. I love the sound of this record. The personnel is amazing. Roland Hanna, Ron Carter, Steve Gadd, Chet Baker, Paul Desmond. Actually, I picked this record up when I was a kid. I remember going into the record store in North Miami Beach, Florida. It was called Blue Note Records. And I asked the guy working there if he could recommend some great jazz albums for me. And he asked me if I ever heard of Jim Hall. And he said, man, you got to get this record. And I'm really glad I did. This is one of my absolutely favorite guitar solos of all time. So we can start out by taking a look at some of the harmonic language that Jim uses over this solo. In particular, he almost exclusively uses the note E natural anytime the G minor 7th chord occurs. And even though G Dorian, which does have that E natural, is a common scale to use in jazz, Dorian over the minor 7th chord, in the context of a 2-5-1 in a minor key, like we have in this tune with the A half diminished to the D7 flat 9 to the G minor 7, the usage of the E natural over the G minor really gives it a nice color. So when we're coming from A half diminished, which has the E flat as the flatted 5th, to D7 flat 9, which also has the E flat but as the flat 9, when we arrive at the G minor and we include that E natural, that really helps it to stand out. It really gives it a nice color. So let's see how this would sound if we went from A half diminished to D7 flat 9 to G minor, but using the Dorian mode when we hit that G minor. So you can hear how the use of that E natural when the minor chord occurs really helps it to stand out and gives it an interesting color. So the next idea is a really simple one, and that's to think in terms of the 1 minor chord over the entire minor 2-5-1 progression. So in other words, while the A half diminished to D7 flat 9 to G minor 7th is going on, we're just thinking in terms of G minor. And that can take the form of a G minor pentatonic scale, like this. Or maybe a G blues scale. Or we can even break it down to something simpler, just a simple G minor arpeggio. So typically with a progression like this, the first thing we might think is to run through all the changes, really outlining them, like. But this idea is to simplify the entire thing, and over that 2-5-1 progression, just think in terms of the 1 minor chord. Let's take a break now from talking about the harmonic side of things, and let's talk about using articulations and inflections to add expressiveness to our lines. In this solo, Jim uses a lot of different types of articulations to add more expressiveness. So one of the things that he does is using slides. He'll slide up into some of the notes. For example, he'll do this. And you can see that just by adding these slides, it adds a little bit more expressiveness to the lines. So we can do the same kind of thing, but without the slides to see the difference. And then with the slides, and of course you can also slide down to notes. You don't only have to slide up. Now another articulation Jim does is using string bends. So for example, he does this line. And you can hear that that little string bend really gives a nice bluesy expressiveness to that line. So again, you can mix it up in your solo. You can have some straight lines, and then you can have some with notes that are bent, like this. Another kind of articulation you can use is hammer-ons and pull-offs. So here's a line where Jim uses a hammer-on, and then he goes. So there's a hammer-on, and then there's that little bluesy bend that I showed you before. And then there's some other lines where he does pull-offs like this. So take that idea as well and mix it up in your solo. So let's get back now to talking about some harmonic concepts. We're going to talk about the 2-5-1 in E flat major, F minor 7 to B flat 7 to E flat major 7. And throughout the solo, Jim seems to be working around the tones from the A flat major 7 chord over the B flat 7. And what's nice about this is that the A flat major 7 over the B flat includes some of the color tones. So here we have A flat, which is just the flat 7 of the B flat 7, but then we have a C, which is the 9 color tone, E flat, which is the 4, and then we have the G, which gives the 13th. So we have this. So when this 2-5-1 comes around in E flat major, we can think about hovering around the A flat major 7 sound over the B flat. So let's continue looking at this 2-5-1 in E flat major. F minor 7, B flat 7 to E flat major 7. This time though, let's look at the 1 major chord, the E flat major 7. Well, in this solo, Jim is often using the color tones, the 9 and the 13, on that E flat major 7 chord. And one thing you can do to get this is to use a G minor pentatonic over the E flat major 7. And you can see in that G minor pentatonic that we have both the 9 and the 13. We have the F and we have the C, which is the 13. As well, we have the major 3rd, we have the major 7, and we have the 5th. So we have all the good chord tones, but we also have a couple of the color tones. F minor 7, B flat 7, E flat major. So one of the cool things that Jim does in this solo is he'll often take a particular interval and he'll stay with that interval through a set of changes, as opposed to doing something more typical like running lines or arpeggios through changes. He'll take something like a perfect fourth and he'll stay on that exclusively, moving that to different scale tones. And he'll use that over a 2-5-1. So something more typical would be like, but instead of that, he'll take the interval. The other cool thing that he does with this is that he uses a lot of rhythmic displacement. So instead of keeping everything on the same beat, like that, he'll vary where he places the notes in the bar, placing them on different beats all the time. And that creates really a sense of playfulness. Now, of course, you can also use other interval types. You can use a fifth, for example. You can go up, but you can also go down. You can mix them up. In this solo, Jim also uses the interval of a third, both a minor third and a major third. So in your solo, instead of always thinking about lines, sometimes think about taking a specific interval and seeing how you can move that through a set of chord changes. So this solo starts off in a pretty interesting way, where there's a 2-bar break where the rest of the band drops out and Jim is left to play by himself. It's typically in this kind of break where you're playing by yourself, you would think to outline the changes and really make it clear and evident what the harmony is supposed to be. So in this break, where we have a B flat major 7 chord going to an A half diminished to D7 flat 9, you might typically do something like this. Where you really run through the changes and make it very clear what the harmony is. But Jim takes an entirely different approach here. Instead, he bases his break off of an interval. In particular, he bases it off the interval of a perfect fourth. So this is his line. the line, you can hear that there are 3 perfect fourths. The first one goes down. The last 2 go up. So the whole line is. And although those notes do fall within the harmony, when played by themselves, they don't really create a clear picture of what the harmony is. So instead here, they create a nice sense of openness and ambiguity. And this is something that you can take and use for your own solos next time there's a break. Instead of just doing the typical thing where you weave in and out of the chord changes, take an intervallic idea and use that through the chord changes.